I forgot. Can I cuss on this show or should I sanitize it a bit?
Just say
Okay,
it as
cuss
it is.
away. Alrighty. There's a line, kind of a litmus test for the family you had, but it's a line at the end that says, towards the mother's memory, Tia could say, I love you and fuck you. My
Yeah.
heart is big enough to hold both. And that's kind of the crux. Like, it's harder to hold two seemingly opposing feelings for the same person,
Yeah.
but it's also necessary to avoid kind of either extreme, right? It's also more honest.
Yeah.
It takes a whole lot more energy, and that's kind of the emotional, I hope, gift and payoff.
Welcome to Journey of the Art, where we discuss the artist, unravel the art, and explore the road between. Hello, and welcome once again to Journey of the Art. Today, I'm joined by Ann Cavlovic to discuss Count on Me, a story about elder abuse and the unimaginable ways family histories can affect us. The novel follows the story of Tia and her brother Tristan, who, alongside his girlfriend, proceeds to take financial advantage of their mother and father when they're both ill. This is a story of broken trust and the duty of love. A really moving story. Welcome, Anne.
Thank you so much.
I always say I'm so thrilled, but I really truly am thrilled to have this conversation with you because of where your book met me when I read it. Well, before we get into all of that beautiful stuff, I want to send out a reminder to like, subscribe, and leave a comment if you're watching the show, or follow the show if you're listening to us today. It really, really makes a difference. So, Anne, I was telling you about where this book met me when I read it. So, I always like to show the book, even though we still will show it somewhere on there. But I read this book at a critical moment in time. I recently traveled to my home country, which is Nigeria, to take care of my mom, who was recovering from surgery. And that's when I really picked up your book to read. So I was reading this book about elder abuse and caregiving while I was in the very act of caregiving. And as I was saying to you before, I almost stopped reading it because I was like, no, like my feelings are too raw at this moment. I don't want to be reading about this. But then I pressed into it and I said, no, I'm going to read. I think this is the best moment actually to read this book and see this thing through the character's eyes. So it was very useful for me, especially I like to think of myself as someone who's in the sandwich generation, which is, middle-aged adults who are caring for their dependent children while simultaneously caring for their aging parents. I want to ask you, what is the origin of this story? Because my gut feeling is that it comes from somewhere personal.
It's a mix. And I will say before getting into that, I'm so glad to hear that was helpful. I sometimes give people a free pass if they're in it, but for some people, it's like they feel seen and it's helpful to sort of read along, and they feel. What I love is when people say, "Oh, I felt less alone," because the statistics are crazy. There's 100,000 people in Canada in sandwich caregiving situations. 1 in 10 family, like at least, experience some form of elder abuse. Yet people feel like we don't talk about it much, so they feel like it's only they feel alone. So for some people it's healing. For some people they can't, and I totally respect that. But I'm glad for you that it was helpful. So the origin story, I've been fascinated with love and money and collisions between them for a long, long time. And I think 20 years ago, I started trying to write something about it, and I just couldn't. I was like, well, maybe this is a topic I'll pursue when I'm more mature as a human and a writer. And then my parents were in nursing homes. This is a work of fiction, but they were in nursing homes. And you see fights spill out in the hallways in nursing homes, and so-called like good families, all the dirty laundry is spilled out for you to see. And it's often it feels like, from what you would hear, very old wounds about who had more attention or who's doing more of the work or who stole whose tricycle, like whatever. And then I realized, okay, this is it. This is where love and money can really they really collide. Right. And so my research and everything sort of took off from there.
Right. So this one of the things I really love about the story is that it acknowledges the weight of balancing these two acts of caring and loving, right? So we just talked about the sandwich generation, and I think the the remarkable thing about it is that it doesn't apportion any blame. It just shares the story and the reality of elder care as it is.
Yeah.
I remember when I was at the hospital with my mom, and just the way that some of the staff were treating her, and me having to advocate for that for her in that moment and say,
Mm.
no, that's not fair, that's not right, we paid for this service. And then the next moment, I'm getting a call from my spouse, and he's telling me about some of the challenges at home. So it was very, it really was truly deeply personal for me reading this book. But we talk about the uh the structural challenges, the systemic flaws. I would uh put it I would define that as the systemic flaws that make elder abuse possible. But the book is really about the family histories, just as you were saying right now, the family histories and the secrets that create individuals who go on to abuse elders
Yeah.
or seniors. And it's this idea that broken people break others. And we see this specifically with Tristan, who is unbelievably cruel to his parents. And it really is mind boggling how it's almost like his mom hurt him. And so he's conspiring with this woman who maybe he's looking to this woman for certain attention that his mother never gave him. But when Tia begins to walk down memory lane, and we see how past events may have influenced his actions, on the other hand, we see his humanity, right? We see the things that made him that way. But he's not the only one who has an uncomfortable history with his parents. And I think everyone has a history with their parents that they're not comfortable with, because parents are flawed. Parents are perfect.
Yeah.
I'm a parent, and I'm flawed as well, right?
Yeah.
But so Tia has also her own stories to tell, but her compassion for her parents is not lost. And so the big question at the end of the day when I read this book is, what makes one child compassionate and the other uncaring?
That is an amazing question, because and I haven't been asked that before, because that is kind of at the core, actually, of what I was trying to get at, right? And I've spent years writing this thing. I still don't know what makes a person, but I was really trying with the novel to get at, okay, what could possibly make someone turn on their own parent? And it didn't interest me to write about, like a nurse in a nursing home. And you pointed, there could be legitimate concerns there, but
Yeah.
the vast majority of elder abuse is perpetrated by a family member or someone close to the family, right? So I wanted to go, well, okay, what could make a family member do that to their own parent? But I wanted to do it in such a way that's like, okay, you can understand maybe where they're coming from, but not in any way that justifies payback, right?
Right.
And I think, so, Tia and Tristan are kind of counterparts in that, they both have legitimate gripes against the parents.
Yeah.
Tristan chose a form more of payback, and Tia chose the harder path, which is to try to work through it and to try to be a cycle breaker, right?
Right.
I'm aware this is a heavy topic, but I wanted to show light through, right? So she's a cycle breaker. She does the work to try to be better by the next generation, but initially she's swinging to the opposite extreme.
Yeah.
So ultimately, what makes a person is still a huge mystery to me. But I do think this is a heroine's journey.
Yeah.
It's not a hero's journey. It's not, she does it all on her own. She has friends, she has people, she has a therapist. Really hard to write therapist in a novel, right? You have to be very solicitous, but she has that support. She invites it in and she accepts it, but she has that support too to do differently. And she's not perfect. It's not easy.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what I was trying to get at.
You actually preempted me. I was gonna ask you something else, but then I think it's just, this is the perfect spot for this. But you talked about the supports. You talked about Tia being a cycle breaker, and I think the whole book really attempts to answer the question: what makes one child uncaring and the other compassionate? What makes the other child, I would say, even forgiving? Not
Yeah.
even compassionate, but forgiving might be the better word here, because it's recognizing the things that have happened, but then you decide to break the cycle. And that brings me to the dysfunctional upbringing aspect of this conversation, and that impact on sandwich generation. So this book is really, we see a lot of unloved mothers who produce unloved and unloving children. But Tia tries to change the narrative, right? And she starts by identifying where the cracks were in her upbringing. So this book really is a journey, where she signs up to chat with the therapist and find out where those cracks were. She acknowledges the things that leaked through these cracks. For example, a feeling of desperation that makes her choose the wrong man. And then she finally comes to the place where she's acknowledged, and then she reaches a wholeness that produces different behaviors and a different outcome for
Mhm.
future generations. And I know that I've asked this question in a different form, but do you think that Tia was successful?
I believe so. I leave her on an intentionally, it's not a spoiler, but on an intentionally optimistic note.
Mm,
Um, and you see a little bit of how her daughter is, down the road. So
yeah,
um, I always want to write things that have a ray of hope. Life is crappy enough. Um, and getting at where you're going, I wanted to sort of write that um, complexity. I think we often really want to feel one way or the other about our parents. We cut them out and we set healthy boundaries supposedly, or oh, honor your mother and father, especially if you come from certain religious traditions. And it's harder to have a bit of both. And
mm,
there's a line at the end, again, it's not a spoiler. I forgot. Can I cuss on this show or should I sanitize it a bit?
just say
Okay,
it as
cuss
it is.
away. Alrighty. There's a line and it's kind of a litmus test. Some people were like, oh, and some people are like, that's a little harsh. And it's kind of a litmus test for the family you had. But it's a line at the end that says, towards the mother's memory, Tia could say, I love you and fuck you. My
Yeah,
heart is big enough to hold both. And that's kind of the crux. Like, it's harder to hold two seemingly opposing feelings for the same person,
yeah,
but it's also necessary to avoid kind of either extreme, right? It's also more honest.
yeah.
It takes a whole lot more energy, and that's
Mm.
kind of the emotional, um I hope, gift and payoff.
Yeah, I'm gonna drop a name here, but the other book that made me feel this way was Manel Matani's Made Have a Happy Ending. So she in her own story as well has this fractious relationship where her mom was great in some respects, but not great in some other respects, and
Mm-hmm.
she was caregiving, and she had to figure out how do you balance both things. So
Yeah.
I think it's an ongoing conversation. I do think Tia was successful, but I think much more than Tia's success is the questions that I have, personally. What are the things that I need to deal with to be able to move on and, break any cycles and be forgiving and not be on the other end of the spectrum, right?
Yeah.
But the other thing that I noticed which is, which I don't think that she was quite successful at, is the second guessing, right? And I've written down here, it's the eternal consequence of living in a dysfunctional family, or a less than ideal situation,
Mm-hmm.
where the result is this constant feeling of, am I doing enough for my child, or am I doing too much? Am
Mm-hmm.
I making the same mistakes? How am I making different decisions? Wow, how am I taking different paths, right? Can you share a little bit about this?
Sure. And it connects to actually the political aspects of the novel, right? And the subplot. Yeah, I do agree. I think it is from my research, which is, psychology today and my own journeys. But as you said, I think that is sort of a natural consequence of that kind of childhood. It's also why we can be gaslighted politically too, right? You don't vote for someone like Trump if you didn't come from a certain family where that kind of authority, where um, that kind of approach was normalized, right?
Yeah.
And so Tia really doubts her reality, and so is too quick to give the benefit of the doubt to other people's experience. And so the subplot deals with one aspect of political spin,
Mm.
because I wanted to parallel spin that happens in families, like, oh, I'm just trying to take care of the parents, and you're way too concerned about money, Tia,
Mm.
with spin that happens politically, right? Like, it's those immigrants or it's whatever, like we can,
True.
and we are primed to fall for that kind of political spin if we have that kind of spin in the family.
Right.
So part of Tia's journey is also to know, like, see this for what's going on. Like, some things are wrong, and and it can also. I wanted to help empathize with people who are going through it, because it can be hard at first to see, am I overreacting? Is someone just having a bad day, or is something, we don't want to believe something nefarious is happening in our own family.
Yeah.
But when the evidence starts to mount, eventually you're like, okay, I have to see this as it is.
Yeah. So just going back, to this idea of elder abuse, it's not an idea, but the fact of it,
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk about the community of seniors, because you just talked about things that are not right, and I think there were two things that stood out to me that I just have been thinking about ever since I read the book. There's a minor character in the story that provides a way for Tia to finally intervene in some way when Tristan's abuse has done significant damage, and that character is Lottie.
Mm-hmm.
She tries her best to intervene, but with the illegal authorizations that that's Tia's mother, has put in place, it's really hard for her to step in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it for me, it surfaced a big question: what can community do when the legal system prevents them from taking positive action?
So I put in lot because it often really helps to have someone outside of the family. And, the legal system, I researched this to try to write one plausible story. It's not the only story. But for the purposes of this podcast, there are resources out there. And I have some links on my website.
Yeah.
There's the Canadian Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse. There are more and more resources, I think, even since I started writing this. There's a consultation out right now for, I forget what it's called, but basically so that the banking sector will have better policies in place. It should not be so easy to walk in and make a joint bank account with the senior.
Yeah.
And I don't get into a lot of the specifics of this because I didn't want to write a novel that was an instruction manual for elder abuse. But that one is fairly known and is hopefully in the process of being fixed.
Mm.
There's other ways to help a senior with their finances that don't completely blur the distinction between one person's money and another's, right? So again, in the spirit of living with a positive note, I mean, I think like with many issues, and particularly this one, and I do think we're making progress on all kinds of issues. I think with ageism, we're probably a little bit further behind.
Mm.
And I think that probably has to do with lots of factors, but also just we don't like to think about aging and death at the best of times, right? So I think our social structures are kind of lagging and improving there too. But like with any sort of issue, if you will, shame is an enabler.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of shame, right? Especially if it's in the family. And, I have Vera saying in particular, how can I explain that I had a son who's doing this to me?
Yeah.
But if it comes out and if we talk about it and you're not alone, then that shame barrier can be removed and people can be more likely to reach out for help because there really are resources out there. And there's a lot of prevention too. The one thing I want to say for sure in any interview podcast is that, oh my goodness, an ounce of prevention can make a huge difference. We never wake up in the morning and say, oh, I want to get my will and power of attorney in place, or I want to, research, care options before I need it. But it is a gift to yourself and it is a gift to your children if you have children, because you can prevent maybe even a small fissure, which we all have in every family. I'm an imperfect mother too. You can prevent a small fissure from mixing with a misunderstanding and turning into a blowout that means that siblings don't speak to each other for the rest of their lives. So if you're listening,
Yeah.
Please, if there's one thing you can do to, that you've been putting off this week, please make a phone call the lawyer, banker, whatever it is,
Yeah.
because prevention can do a lot too.
Yeah. That was definitely something that I took away. And I and I think I even, was saying to my parents, you need to do this, you need to do that. Like,
Yes.
you
Good.
know, because I could see that, if certain things were done beforehand, that whole situation would have turned out differently. So
Totally.
the other question I have on this community for seniors is on the representations and perceptions of nursing homes. So
Hmm.
you do highlight the environment, the staff, and the delivery of care, and some are great and some are not so great. You also highlight those who are willing to go to nursing homes, like that's seniors who are willing to go to nursing homes, and those who aren't willing to go to nursing homes. And I know that you couldn't have told this story without highlighting nursing homes, but can you tell me what you found most striking as this about the system as you read the book?
And this comes from my direct experience in nursing homes. And you have to draw a distinction between retirement homes, which are places you can go to voluntarily. They vary widely in quality and care. A lot has to do with the management. And if the management actually lives in, tends to be much better care. That's
Mm,
one thing. Nursing homes are, you know, they're not a choice to go into. It's your, medically need that level of care. There's a public and private system in Canada, in most provinces anyway. And as much as they're both regulated by the government, not for profits have better outcomes than the for profit ones.
mm,
But what I learned anyway in the system, and my parents were in different for profit nursing homes, is that the staff are amazing. Like we have kind of I think perception that comes up in the news of, like the bad apples or whatever, the nurse who does something horrible. But again, most abuse is actually not perpetrated by someone like a nurse. It's by someone known to the family, right? The nurses are 99% heroes. And I was careful to portray them that way in the home. They are overworked. There's maybe a big boss who's like, cut shifts to save money and pad their
mm,
bonuses. And so they've got too many people to attend to. But the vast majority of nurses and caregivers of any kind, and often racialized Canadians, right, are doing work I could not do, and doing it well and providing a level of care that they deserve. They deserve so much more celebration for what they do.
mm. Yeah, I love that positive note because it's a really gloomy uh, aspect of life. Like you said, nobody wants to think or talk about aging or dying or preparing your will and all of those kinds of things. So I think it's a great way to shine a light on something that actually is working.
Yeah.
But I want to zoom out here and talk about female friendships. And so that's just talking about back to this sandwich generation. So we've been talking about the aging parents and the seniors, but now we're talking about, the sandwich generation. Madison is one of Tia's friends and an essential support system. And like Tia, she also has a tumultuous relationship with her mother. In her life, we see her make some questionable parenting choices with her toddler Carter, but she makes another critical decision that um, ends the relationship between herself and Tia. And I'm trying so hard not to share any spoilers here, but the relationship came to an end because of something that Madison's husband did. And it was so sad to read this portion of the book, especially when I, you know, reflected on the journey and how both of them had come through the hardest, parts of Tia's experiences. And I wondered just why. And I concluded, just like you said earlier, that it was shame, right? And it's the
Mm-hmm.
type of shame that doesn't address, but takes, but acts irrationally.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same one that Tia's mother has when she finds out about Mr. McGinnis. What are your thoughts on this shame that doesn't address but acts irrationally?
Interesting. Um, and Tia also has another friend, Molly, who is more of the truer friend. And I wanted
Yeah.
that juxtaposition, I think, because I knew I was going to be talking about parenting and cycle breaking. And as soon as you do that, you can fall into all these traps of like, well, you must then be uber mother to be doing the right thing. And so um, Madison is kind of a foil to that, right? Because she
Yeah.
presents as the Uber mother. She's, if it was, this is written circa 1990s, but today she would be the Instagram person posting her very perfect life.
Yeah.
And as with any of that, as soon as you go behind the screen, you see that it's not quite as simple in her case too, right? Um, she was still community. She was still community for Tia in important ways. Um, but yeah, I don't even think I realized that, but there is that parallel that there's shame there and there's shame um, in the sort of elder care situation. So that's another parallel. Fascinating. I've learned something about my book talking to you.
Yeah, it was really, yeah, I just, like you, I like to think about, why do people do the things that they do?
Yeah,
And I think really that's what Tia tries to do in this story, is like, why is Tristan doing what he's doing? And you know what can I do differently?
yeah.
And it's the same. I think that Madison came to a point where she decided, this, why have I come to this point? Okay, this is where I'm at, this is what I'm going to do. um and sometimes we don't know, we just, well, we can ask the questions. Anyway, I wanted to move us again back to the singers, and I want to ask about Vera's obsession with her jewelry and what it represents. And to me, it's this idea of holding on to something that can be controlled, coming from a life where nothing went as planned and things just went in different directions. But this collection of jewelry that she has, and I think really that in this moment that the collection of jewelry is a representation of her life. Some things were great and some things were not so great. And so she has this collection of
Mm-hmm.
jewelry, and some of them are really nice and some of them are plastic. The value is really small. But I wanted to give you a moment to talk about uh, Vera's jewelry, and what it represents. And you know how Vera says to Tia, this will one day be yours. And so it's like, my histories, my stories, my experiences, everything will one day be yours. And you can choose what you want to keep and what you want to let go of. And even throughout the story, she'd say to Tia, "Oh, why don't you come over to the house and bring me this piece of jewelry?" And it's almost like, why don't you go into this part of my history and think about it and sit with it for a moment and decide what you want to do with it. So anyway, these are my wonderings about this significant symbol in the story, and I wanted to give you a chance to talk about it.
Oh, you get right to the heart of things.
I do.
So yes, own it. This novel is again a meditation on love and money in the sense also of differentiating, what is a transactional relationship, right? Nothing wrong with transactions in a market. But if I were to say that, you're in my relationship was transactional, that's not a compliment, right?
Mm,
So what's the distinction, right? Because any relationship has a give and take. So what's the boundary between a healthy give and take versus something that's descended into the transactional?
right.
Um, and spoiler, I think the take home is, are you giving and receiving out of concern for both yourself and the other person, or just to maximize your own gain, right?
Mm,
And so Vera, I made her a very transactional character, right? So it's a give to get strategy, like, oh, I'm giving you this jewelry, but you have to pay me back. You have to come for a visit. You have to do this. You have to whatever, right? And that can be very confusing when you're first in that kind of a relationship because you think, oh, well, okay, someone's doing something nice for me, but there's hooks, which is not to
yeah.
say that we give totally without, like that we give totally selflessly, but there's a difference between reciprocity and transactionalism.
Mm,
And so Vera learned, and I've learned too, people can come out of a trauma like a war, in her case, World War II. They can come out of a trauma like that and be even tighter with family, or they can glom onto things. And
mm,
somewhere along the way, Vera learns that things are more reliable. So she's giving her daughter that pearl ring and says, if you take care of this, it will never let you down. because she's been let down by humans and she's learned to attach more to things. And
Right.
a lot of us do that, right? And our consumer culture encourages that, to feel that things are more reliable than humans. And some humans aren't particularly reliable, right? But it's not a healthy manifestation. So that giving back and forth is sort of that currency, right? And it's exchange. It's a free trade agreement. But it's not a loving, or it's mixed, but it's not a healthy reciprocal give and take between mother and daughter.
Right. Right. Okay, so we're almost at time here, but I still have a ton of questions to ask you because book was so good.
Thank you.
There are some aspects of the writing that I found curious, and I wanted to give you a moment to talk about those things. The first thing is the table of contents, and it's filled with these accounting terms, which is wonderful because I think the story really is an accounting of events, an account of love overdrawn and love deposited. It's a story of questionable balances. What was going through your mind as you created the table of contents?
So again, I had mentioned that I wanted a subplot that dealt with spin, and no shortage of examples of that in politics. But the particular example I used, just because it got under my skin, was these audits of environmental charities that was happening under the Harper government circa early 2000s. And at first I thought, well, maybe Tia is going to be like fighting against that. Then I realized, no, she's got to be the auditor. She's got to be working, like stuck in this job doing this that she
Right.
realizes is actually political and predatory. So I had to make her an accountant. And then I realized, well, that actually makes sense. If she's coming from that kind of environment, though, she would be raised to, like, she would be interested in accounting in the sense of, like, I'm going to study transactionalism as a way of differentiating it from love. So sometimes we
Mm,
study what a thing isn't to better understand what it is, right? Like a near
right.
enemy, so to speak. So she's an accountant. She's been trying to master the puts and takes in her family. Um, so, um, so then I just, and then getting to process. I don't know much about accounting. I get someone else to do my taxes. I signed up to be the treasurer at my son's parent committee at his elementary school, which, if you know
Oh,
anything about parent committees in elementary school, you recognize this is a deep commitment to my art, right? But I wanted to, like, understand, kind of method act my way through, like, what's it like to be an accountant? Like, how do you prepare balance sheets and
yeah.
yada yada. Um, and then I just had fun looking up accounting terms. They don't read this as an accounting textbook, but they each, term has something to do with, the theme that's going on in
Yeah.
in the story, right? Or in that chapter. So that was just fun.
Yeah. And that was so cool. So, so
Oh,
cool.
thanks.
Okay. So the other thing is the perspective in the book, the perspectives in the book. Tia tells a story from the past, the present, and the future. And I really appreciated this holistic approach to telling the story because it made it feel complete. Right? Like she'd just go to the past and tell us something that happened. She'd tell us about the present, and then she'd look to the future. What was your intention behind this? I know this must have been deliberate, but what was your intention behind it?
Because, as we said earlier, I wanted to try to get closer. I don't think we ever understand fully the core of what makes a human, but I was trying to get closer to it. I was trying to show, I wanted to show enough of, so Tia and Tristan's background, that the reader could understand why Tristan could be this way without without saying, oh, well, that the payback is justified.
Right.
And there was a lot of volume control in different drafts, right? At first,
Mm,
as normal, Tia was kind of Tristan was kind of a 2D bad guy, and beta readers were, commenting on that. So, okay, so I went more into his backstory, and then I think I went too far, and people were like, oh, like, I have a lot of sympathy for Tristan. Is Tia an unreliable narrator? Like, no. So I had to, like, go back, it feels like volume control, on a soundboard, like,
mm,
of it won't be right for every reader, but I was trying to get a balance that most readers would get the complexity of, this is where someone's coming from. It does not justify their actions, but you
right.
understand maybe where it's coming from and why they're making those choices. And so to do that, I had to kind of go into the past as much as it's in first person narration. Um, but Tia is a curious, curious character. And so she's trying to sort of understand herself and her family, where it comes
Right.
from. So I think she arrives at a place of, I don't even know if it's quite forgiveness. I think forgiveness is one of these tricky words that's defined in a gazillion different ways. Understanding, but not forgiveness in the sense of making it okay. But
Right.
understanding, yeah.
Yeah. I love that analogy of volume control, and I'm gonna put that one in my back pocket. But yeah, I love that. I love that. Anyway, I want us to move us now to the section of the show where we talk about what makes you you as a writer. And you said in your form that you have a strict writing schedule.
Mm-hmm.
What does that look like?
Different configurations depending upon my work schedule, etc. But I've worked part-time for 15 years and currently working full-time. For many years, I took a 20% pay cut to have one day off per week. So I had all day Friday to write, but I could only really write for 3 or 4 hours. So I had the morning to write and then would, do other childcare or whatever responsibilities the afternoon. When I started working on the novel, I realized I needed more of a daily practice, that if I had a week gap in between writing, it was harder to pick up. That kind of worked for short stories, but was harder for a novel. So I switched it such that I still had 80% at work, but I would start work at 10:30 every day, like 5 days a week. So my son at the time would get on the school bus at 7:30. I would get to my desk by 8. I would write from 8 to 10, and then from 10 to 10:30, I would commute to work and repeat. And then when I had a writing grant, I had more time off, but I at first was later getting to my writing desk. I think I mentioned this before, but I started to write myself late slips, and it's not as punitive as it sounds. I just realized, in my day job, I will show up to somebody else's crappy meeting on time, whether they're late or unprepared. And I wanted to show myself the same level of compassion. So it's like 8 o'clock is my time to show up at my desk. If I'm not, like, I want to see how often I'm letting myself down. And seeing the list on my wall made me realize, ooh, like, when I have more time, it's easier to, like, well, I'll just put in a load of laundry. I'll do this or I'll do that. No, it's my appointed time to myself. I'm showing up at 8. That's it. And it worked.
I like that. I like that. Another thing I'm gonna put in my back pocket. Yeah.
Just self-compassion with the late slips, but yeah.
Yeah, but I do love that, because I think discipline is so critical for an artist. It is the thing that keeps you going when the passion runs out.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So thinking about the passion and things running out, what has helped you, or what is the secret to staying on the journey of your art?
Goodness. So many things, but I think one thing I can say is, and I kind of got this from dance as well. And, even going into an interview like this or putting a book out in the world, and, you think you can, for people who haven't yet published a short story or a novel, you could think, oh, when I have it published, I'll have arrived, I'll feel better. And no, it's just like money. You think you get a little bit more money. Once it lifts you out of poverty, you just start comparing yourself to different people. And so you don't actually get happier, right? Yeah. And same thing, I kind of thought, oh, when I have, like, the novel in my hands, then I'll be happy. And then I just start I go on Instagram and that annihilates it. I'll just compare myself to other people. But what keeps me going is, feedback I get from people that it really helped them. And I maybe hear about, one out of, I don't know how many. Most people don't give the feedback to writers. But I try to remember, okay, for everyone I hear who gives me that feedback, there's other people whose lives have been somehow helped. I used to do a lot of dance. And before going, I would get nerves every single time. And before going on stage, my mantra was, give the gift. Because I appreciate anyone on stage who has kind of a generosity in how they perform, irrespective of their technical skill. I enjoy it more if I feel a certain generosity. And so I try to just, like, give the gift, because you don't know how it's received out in the world for the most part. And I can have still a lot of doubt. But when I get that little bits of feedback, I'm like, no, it's a gift. It's out there in the world. I'm helping people, and that's a privilege. And to have some faith in that, if you will, and then try again.
Yeah. I love that. Give the gift. Yes.
Yeah.
No questions asked. Just, yeah, I really like that. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much for coming on the show and for chatting with me about your amazing book, which I really enjoyed reading.
Thank you so much for wonderful questions too. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. And thank you for listening or watching us today. Count on Me is published by Guernica Editions and is available for purchase through the links in the description box if you're watching, or the show notes if you're listening to us today. Another reminder to follow the show, leave a comment whether you're listening or watching, and connect with me on Instagram at Journey of the Art Pod. Thank you again for joining us, and I'll see you in the next episode. On the next episode, I'll be chatting with another inspiring artist. But before then, I'd love to hear from you. Tell me what you think about this show and this episode. Feel free to drop me a note here or send me a DM on Instagram at Journey of the Art Pod. Finally, please subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube, or follow and rate the show if you're listening elsewhere. Help me connect with other artists who need a dose of inspiration today. Until next time, stay on the journey of your art.